Okay. Just give me a moment. I'm a little frazzled right now. All right, so roll call. I see that everyone is here and I'm trying to do this.
Darlene, do you want me to call the roll?
I'm just trying to open everything up and I'm just having a bit of a problem. It is not showing me everybody. Okay, so we have Mr. Meeks.
Here.
Mr. Goldstein.
Present.
Ms. Shanahan. Ms. McMurray.
Here.
Ms. Ayers and
Here.
Mr. Kites.
Here.
And I am here. Thank you. All right. Just give me a moment. This is just not a good evening right now. So can we have a motion to approve the minutes of the July 13th meeting? Someone
Motion. Yep. Motion.
Thank you, Ms. McMurray.
No problem.
If there are any changes, if there are no changes, all in favor, please just signify by raising your hands. Okay, thank you. Any abstentions? Nope. Thank you. So on to public participation. Is that Delene or Larry? Delene?
Yeah, we have Diane Laratello.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening.
Okay.
Yes, hi. Good evening, Madam Chairwoman and committee.
And Diane, let me say thank you for waiting. I had a little issue, so that's why we're kind of late getting started, but I appreciate you staying and waiting around for us to get started.
No problem. I hope the rest of your evening goes better. And I think with the things that I have to say, it might help you all with your deliberations tonight. I know I have 3 minutes. I'm going to spend I have 3 items on the agenda. The first one is a discussion item on the Recreation and Parks Master Plan. For many years on and off with the previous, with Mike, we tried to get money for the master plan. I'm so happy that this council and mayor's office got the money. But I want to say, I wanted to know, is there a chance that some of us could still comment? I never saw any surveys or never was contacted for public engagement. And as many of you know, I've been living in this town for a long time. So I would like to know that. Number 2, number 8 on your agenda for Freeze Park railing. I know Mr. Stowers is new to the organization, of course. Many years ago, there had been, I suggest that possibly you might want to go back to the drawing board on this, because former designs of Freeze Park included putting in the possibility of an amphitheater that gets people closer to the Norwalk River. Many of you may remember that I was a founding president of the Norwalk River Watershed Association. I didn't know if the Norwalk River Watershed Association currently has been in contact with Mr. Stowers, but I'm not sure that spending money on a railing, if the rehab of the park may include changes to how that railing goes. So you may want, it's in these different phases. I do know that the Discala organization was once going to help pay for some of a park design. So that's in District A, and you may be interested in that. Lastly, I'll reserve most of my time, the remaining minute, on item 3, which, I'm sorry, item 5A, Devon's Place. I think the background on this may be of use to this committee. I am not opposed to ARPA funds being placed to renovate this park. However, those of you that are new on the council and in the staff need to know that this particular park was the first boundless outdoor playground in Fairfield County that was dedicated to children that have all kinds of abilities, but physical and sensory and other disabilities as well. And because of this, when AMEC Karting first put in an application with zoning way back when to have a demolition debris collection transfer station, many of us, including the tenants of Lockwood Matthews Mansion, were against it. Then they filed for an expansion. And at the time I was hired by the Sclafani organization, and we put together letters. Even the Chamber of Commerce were against expansion. The reason why this is important is because they are at times downwind or upwind of this park. So I just ask that when this park is being designed, besides what the O'Neill, I think, or O'Brien and Sons, that we make a special effort to put in additional plant screening to try to screen out dust, diesel fuel dust from the trucks, as well as the potential lead paint dust that is inside, but they do have their doors open. No matter what they will tell you, there is some dust escaping outside. Why the city of Norwalk allowed this is beyond us, very disappointed, but it's there right now. It was allowed under in 2014, there was a different zoning commission then. I think Joe Santo was the chair, but nevertheless, the case was made that this was not a good place for a demolition debris transfer station, even though our transfer station for the city, it's much farther away. So that is not a reason to have approved it. I just ask that possibly Mr. Stowers and Mr. Hughes add screening, look at some health issues related to triggers that would come out of this particular AMEC Karting, including dust and diesel. So I thank you for your time. You could look up Boundless. It's a special kind of playground called the Boundless Outdoor Playgrounds. There are several around the country. We were the first in Fairfield County. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Larchella. Is there anybody else, Mr. Lean?
Nope, we have nobody else raising their hand.
Ms. Young, could I ask a question of Ms. Larchella before she departs or is muted?
Why not? Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just curious if she was referring to the Stantec plan that we hatched in 2017 regarding Freeze Park. Is that what you were talking about? There's an amphitheater, stage, path, plaza, quite a bit of work. We may have lost her. Okay. Thank you anyway.
She should be able to. Diane?
Yes, did you unmute me? Oh, there you go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm not sure, Brian. It may have included that. So I don't remember all the details. I just remember that many of us advocated for finding a way to let the public know that there is a river beyond the railing, and there are many ways of doing so. And one way was to put together the possibility of an amphitheater type steps leading down to a section of the river, making sure there's a railing so there aren't insurance problems, you know, but it might have been Stantec. I really don't remember.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Stantec plans on the city website.
Brian, Mr. Meek, I think that's a conversation that we just need to have later on if you and Diane want to exchange.
Okay,
normally we don't do this during public participation.
And I'm sorry, Darlene. I have a hard stop tonight, so I'm not going to be able to find out about a lot of that. I mean, this city is really good at developing master plans, so it would be nice if we picked up on one that was developed before.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for answering the question, Ms. Larchella. All right, so we're going to move on to old business. There's no old business. New business. The City of Norwalk reserves the right to cancel the event for public health or safety reasons as determined by the City of Norwalk in its sole discretion. The City of Norwalk shall not be liable for damages arising from the cancellation of the event. 5.1, approve the use of Norwalk High School athletic field and immediate surrounding grounds by Marching Band, Inc. for the Cavalcade of Bands event to be held on Saturday, October 8, 2022 from 11:30 a.m. to 9 p.m. Set up to begin at 8 a.m. with tear down at 10 p.m. Approximately 1,000 people. Would someone move the item, please? Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. Mr. Stowers, do we have someone?
Yeah, I'll take this, Madam Chair. So this is a year. Yep, this is a yearly event. With Norwalk High School, as you guys remember, you approved one for Brian McMahon at our last meeting. So this is the Cavalcade of Bands for Norwalk High. It's an excellent event. They have a lot of people, a lot of energy. Never have any issues with garbage or things on site. So I recommend approval.
Okay. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? All in favor? Please signify by raising your hands or saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That passes. All right. 5.2, approve the use of Lockwood Matthews parking lot and immediate surrounding grounds by Norwalk River Valley Trail for their NRVT Mutt Strut event to be held on Saturday, October 22nd, 2022 from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Setup time at 1 p.m. with tear down at 6 p.m. Approximately 80 to 100 people. Someone move the item, please. Thank you, Ms. McMurray.
So, Madam Chair, I believe this is either second or third year with this event. I sort of lose track now with COVID when the last time we held it. But it's a cute event. People come with their dogs. They walk the NRVT. It brings a little bit of exposure, to the Norwalk River Valley Trail. They do have some tables and things set up for literature and for information. So it's a good community event, and hopefully more people will turn out this turnaround.
Does anyone have any questions for Ken? Okay, all in favor?
Yes.
Okay, that looks to be unanimous. Thank you. 5.3, authorize the purchasing agent to issue a purchase order to Bobcat of Connecticut, Inc. in an amount not to exceed $83,211 for the purchase of a Bobcat Toolcat UW53 from capital account number noted off the Combis pricing contract, FAC 88. Would somebody please move the item? Thank you, Ms. Shanahan.
So, Madam Chair, this was a purchase that was approved throughout the capital budget process. The Parks Department currently has one existing Bobcat Toolcat. It's a multi-use machine. So we currently use it for snow plowing. We have a snow blower for it. We have a field grader for the front. We have a bucket. We have a set of forks. So it's one piece of equipment that has probably 8 or 9 different uses. So we do currently have one. We've had such good luck with that one that we're looking to purchase a second.
Okay. Are there any questions on that? Let's see if I can see anybody's hands up. Mr. Meek, did you have your hand up? No.
Voting yes.
Oh, okay. You're voting yes. Thank you.
A little ahead of me. Sorry.
All right. So all in favor? Opposed, abstentions? It's unanimous. Thank you. Item 5.4, authorize the purchasing agent to issue a purchase order to Embankscape Equipment LLC, doing business as RC Mowers, in an amount not to exceed $62,950 for the purchase of a Tract 60 rotary mower from capital account number noted off the HGAC pricing contract. Would someone move that item, please? Thank you, Ms. Ayers.
So, Madam Chair, this is another capital account purchase. One of the sites that we're tasked to maintain is that of Oyster Shell, which, to be honest, is probably the most difficult site to maintain in the city. As you're aware, there's some steep banks that head down toward the river. We do have a current slope mower, which just turned 12 years old. So it's feeling its age, it's become relatively unreliable. So this is for the purchase of a new slope mower, mainly to maintain Oyster Shell Park.
Are we replacing the old one, or the old one will be used? But
we'll keep the old one as a backup because it's always good to have a backup. And DPW does use the mower also for cutting the banks along the river.
Okay.
So we're going to keep both.
Okay. Does anyone have any further questions or comments for Mr. Hughes? So all in favor of the item? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Mr. Meek, while I'm in the middle of this, you won't be able to be here till the end. Is that what you said?
Yeah, sorry, I got a hard stop at 8 o'clock tonight, but don't let that stop your business, please.
Well, I'd like you to hear about the master plan because the folks are here. That would be great for you to.
I'm in favor of the last master plan and the 10 ones before that, and this one in front of it. Let's just get a master plan done. That's all I ask. Let's just get it done.
Great, we're getting it done. All right. 5.5, and so it looks like I should just probably, I'll read them individually. 5.5, authorize the purchasing agent to issue a purchase order to M.E. O'Brien and Sons for the following playground renovations off the Connecticut State Pricing Contract number 17PSX0081. I think I should move all these together. It makes more sense because these are all Robert, I'm sorry, committee. Is Robert on the call?
Yes, I'm on the call.
So these are all different.
They're all
and probably would require individual approvals,
well,
or do we want to move them all together?
I want to move them all together.
Okay.
Yeah,
5A,
same funding source. Yeah.
Oh, same. Okay. I just wanted to be clear about that because I saw ARPA and then something else. 5A, so we're going to move them all together. I'll just read them all. 5A, Devon's Place Playground, amount not to exceed $316,558.35 from capital account number noted. 5B, Boughton Street Park, amount not to exceed $114,556.65 from ARPA account noted. 5C, Flax Hill Park, amount not to exceed $132,268.40 from ARPA account noted. 5D, authorize the Director of Recreation and Parks or his designee to issue change orders on the renovation of Evans Place Playground in an amount not to exceed $31,658 from the same capital account. Someone please move all those items. Thank you, Ms. McMurray.
So, Madam, just for clarification, Devon's Place is an approved capital project. The other two, Boughton Street and Flax Hill, are from the ARPA funding account. Just to clarify.
Just for clarification, right? That's what kind of confused me. And so, do we have Robert? Do you want to share some information about this? I know we kind of talked.
I can speak.
This
yeah.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can speak on this. So we use M.E. O'Brien as our landscape vendor. They supply landscape structure equipment, and we have a pretty extensive stock now of landscape structure equipment. So it makes it very easy for us to stock replacement parts, nuts and bolts, swings, slides. So that's why we stick to M.E. O'Brien, and they are on the state pricing contract list. So they do give us competitive pricing, and the purchasing agent is happy with that. Just to speak briefly on Devon's Place, as Diane Lauricella stated, that is a boundless ADA playground. It's widely used. It's time for a renovation. So what we're doing is, I'm not sure if you've been there lately, but there are some sections of a rubberized surface, but there's also additional sections of a mulch surface, which makes sort of a hard mix. So this renovation is going to be to replace all the surfacing material with a rubberized surface. And we're also going to address a few of the play pieces that really haven't stood up to the test of time. So, you know, all in all, the playground is keeping the same layout. There will be all brand new rubberized surfacing, which will be awesome for the boundless playground, you know, motif. And also, there's a lot of mature plantings around the site. When this was first planted, a lot of the plants were small. But if you go down there now, it's hard to even see into the playground from Crescent Street because of the, you know, the plantings that are grown together. So I think in terms of mature plantings, I think we're there. There wasn't really, you know, much plans to add any additional plantings. It's something, you know, we can always look at if it's requested. Yeah. But I was there, you know, the other day, and it's pretty grown in, and it actually looks nice. So this is an exciting project. Like I said, it does get a lot of use, you know, especially based on its location inside of Matthews Park and its proximity to stepping stones. Yeah. And then the other two playgrounds, Bowling Street and Flax Hill, we're replacing playgrounds that are 15 plus years old and are in need of, you know, some TLC.
Yeah. And we can take another look at that, the plant screening. We will take another look at that. Okay. Darlene, you weren't here earlier. I had said that Ken would handle the first part of the meeting because it's all his stuff.
Right.
But I will be in the briefing with Nick Kuhn.
Perfect. Thank you. Councilwoman Ayers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a particular question about Devon Place. I use that place extensively with my older son, as he was someone that had boundary issues. And a concern that I had was the water elements in that area. I know it's kind of a refresh, but it's from what I understand that you just said, Ken, it's not a total rehaul. Is there some areas where we can improve maybe what we did originally, or we're just gonna update it how it is?
So like what area specifically? So all the surfacing is going to be replaced. So that's all going to be, if you recall, there's some areas of some rubber material right next to some, you know, landscape mulch. So that's going to be all rubber, which is going to sort of make a seamless transition from play piece to play piece, as well as from sidewalk to play area.
Correct me if I'm wrong. When we did the water,
the splash pad
at the beach, that was after Devon's Park. Devon came first. Devon had the well first.
Correct.
We need to relook at that well and what that looks like, how the water is coming out, how the kids are able to interact with that well. Even in the cleaning of that area, I've been there before, and there was a lot of broken glass and stuff of that nature. But particularly, I as a parent, I had problems with the water piece of the park. I was glad that there was a water piece because I don't live near the beach. So that was a great alternative for my family to utilize instead of having to go all the way to the beach, as well as the larger play equipment, the one on the, I don't even know what side it would be on, but the larger one with the multiple sides. Often many kids got hurt and their hands got stuck and stuff in those slides that like you roll down.
The roller slide. Yep.
Yeah. And I know that, you know, we did that playground a long time ago, but there's some more modern things that we probably can look at to eliminate some of those things. Those might be little small things, but as a parent that used that park extensively, those little things would make a difference.
Yep. So I can tell you, you know, being that you know the playground, there's a piece called Sway Fun, which is sort of like a big seat that's supposed to rock back and forth. So that piece is going to be replaced because it doesn't rock anymore and it's not widely used. So we're going to put a play structure in that area. And we're also going to replace the play structure where they have that little digger crane, which is sort of on the top level. So we're going to connect those play pieces also. So we have about 3 or 4 different play pieces in addition to the surfacing. So it's going to be a good refresh to the park.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay. All in favor? Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Meek and I both have our hand raised.
I'm sorry. I see hands. So I'm not sure who was first, but Ms. McMurray?
Mr. Meek was first. I defer to him.
Okay, Mr. Meek.
Well, thank you. I think my question is quick. This same vendor we've been using for a lot of parks, like the splash pad, I think I heard mentioned. Cranberry School, I think, is one. We use these guys. We're using these guys for a lot of stuff in town, right?
So the splash pad, the name of the equipment for the splash pad is actually Vortex. And O'Brien and Son is actually our distributor for the Vortex equipment. So that's why we go through M.E. O'Brien for Vortex. But they also supply Landscape Structures, which is the playground equipment.
Okay. I mean, these guys do great work, in my opinion. But I mean, is this kind of who we're using exclusively for all our city parks, or they just happen to be the winning bid every time we come up?
No. So I've been using them exclusively for the fact being it's easier to stock replacement parts for one type of playground.
Replacement? Yeah.
Yep. So I'll give you an example. Oyster Shell Park. That playground was a Sandy Hook playground done by volunteers. And against my recommendation, they used a different vendor, Little Tykes, who's actually no longer in business. And I can't even get parts for that playground anymore. So I try to avoid situations like that on a bigger scale citywide, especially at our schools.
Thanks a lot, Ken. I appreciate it. And tell them to rent some space down here if they're doing so much work for us, right?
I know. At least buy us lunch.
I'd like to see a Connecticut vendor get this stuff, but I get it. Nobody else is doing the work the right way. So thanks.
Yep.
Ms. McMurray?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to expand on what Nicole was saying. I haven't been to the I've been to the playground recently, but I haven't used the splash pad recently because I do live by the beach. And so we defer to that one. But I remember two things back when we did use it before the beach had its splash pad. One was the surface that you spoke about. There was concrete around the splash pad at the time. And I always found it to be very slippery and dangerous when the kids fell. And then two is that opening to the street right there. You know, if anybody has little kids, you know that they take off running and sometimes they're faster than we are. And that was always a concern for me too. And I don't know if there's anything that has been done there to sort of alleviate that stress, especially since it's a busy street there. So
yeah. So just a quick point on the access for kids. That's actually part of the NRVT. So it was recommended that we keep that open to bikes and strollers and pedestrians, as opposed to fencing it off, or even we do have a bollard there, but obviously that stops vehicles, but not kids. So there's a little bit of trickiness. You know, there is talk about moving the NRVT over through to the cemetery, which if that does officially happen, then we can close off the bottom of Crescent Street at Devon's Place.
Thank you so much.
Any other comments? All in favor? All right, looks unanimous. Thank you. All right. Welcome. Okay. 5.6, authorize a purchasing agent to issue a purchase order to Jen Grass Ford in an amount not to exceed $142,345.08 for the purchase of 3 F-250 regular cab 4x4 pickup trucks from ARPA account noted of the state contract number 19PSX0161. Someone move the item. Thank you, Councilwoman McMurray.
So, Madam Chair, this purchase is replacing 3 of our existing 250 pickup trucks, which they are the year 2000, which doesn't sound that bad, but when you think about it, they're 22 years old. So, you know, these are much needed, and, you know, we're thankful for the ARPA money because, you know, it takes a little pressure off our capital budget.
Does anyone have any questions for Ken?
I just want to say that I think a 22-year-old vehicle does sound bad. So I'm glad you're getting this.
Well, you say 2000. That's not that bad.
It's vintage.
I mean, it's younger than me, obviously, but it's not good with regards to a car.
Okay. Mr. Councilman Meeks, you have a question?
I have no concern with this. I would just ask Ken to be prepared at the general council meeting to justify why these aren't EVs.
Okay. according to our fleet manager, they aren't quite there yet in terms of pulling trailers and plows and, you know, sort of the heavy use. You know, once again, with the parks department, when we get a vehicle, it's not a one-use vehicle. You know, we use it to pull ball field trailers. We use it to, you know, push snow. Sometimes we put a leaf vac on the back. So in terms of heavy dutiness, it's sort of what we need.
I'm not going to ask you. Someone is, though.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Meeks. Yeah, I was going there.
Any further questions for Ken?
Well, I am curious, Ken. So like I keep reading about all the Ford trucks that are supposed to be so good and they can, you know, charge your equipment and they can carry heavy loads. Are they just not really what you need for things like this?
Yeah, so these are actually rack body pickup trucks. So we can load mulch in the back and we can, you know, tow trailers. And so they're not like an everyday driver truck. They're more of a work truck. Our fleet manager has done some research in terms of electric vehicles for trucks. First off, the weight is just astronomical. They're looking at over 18 months now for, you know, the waiting list for the vehicle. And as he told me, they're not quite there yet in terms of what we need in terms of power and, you know, just workability.
So just
I have a Prius, so I'm on your side.
I know.
Councilman Goldstein?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I was going to contribute is, I know we had a similar discussion at last night's meeting. I think that, I don't know if there are hybrids in this style of vehicle or something in the middle. If not at the moment, I understand. I mean, Lisa's right. I mean, I was thinking about, I mean, there are these like expensive electric trucks like Rivians, and then there's, you know, these Ford F-150s that they're trying to make electric. I guess Brian highlighted a good point, which is, I guess if you can begin to sort of chart the course of what we think the future is and what our timeline is for getting there, especially as we're approaching budget season, it's a question that's going to come up a lot.
And I don't think they have an electric F-250 yet. I think the 150s.
Yeah, I don't think so either, which is why I'm saying, you know, I don't want the practical to get in the way of,
right.
I don't want the ideal to get in the way of the practical, but I also want to make sure that we're keeping our eye on the prize.
Sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Actually, I've asked, and I don't know if Eric is he actually going to the conference? I don't know.
Yes,
okay.
He is.
One of the things I asked Eric to do at the conference, and what I normally do at the conference, they have a trade show where they have all the fleets, and it shows how far they've come with the electric vehicles, all the way from the pickups all the way to garbage trucks. And so I asked Eric to check in that on an annual basis. I used to do that. Our fleet manager. Things are getting better, but they haven't been quite where we want them to go. But every year they're getting better, and it is my plan to establish a conversion plan over a number of years to convert some of our equipment and our trucks, either hybrid or completely electric. So we have our eye on that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And I think it speaks to what we were all talking about over the last couple of days and actually months and years. And I think I kind of brought that up is, do we look at this collectively with all of the fleets, the cars that we use in the city, as opposed from department to department, right? I think that's a study of, you know, that shouldn't take that long to figure out, right? What does that plan look like over the next 5 years or so? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's something that an Office of Sustainability would be looking at that whole thing.
Right. And prioritizing who needs those vehicles, like
exactly
what our current fleet looks like. So thank you. Do we have to vote on that, right? All in favor? We didn't vote. Unanimous. Mr. Kites?
Yes, I'm still here. That's a big yes. Thanks for checking though, Chair.
I got to check. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Let's see. Give me 1 second. This takes forever. All right. 5-7. authorize the purchasing agent to issue a purchase order to Gabrielli Isuzu Truck in an amount not to exceed $78,676.64 for the sole source purchase of a 2023 Isuzu box truck from ARPA account number noted. Would someone please move the item? Thank you, Ms. Shanahan.
So, Madam Chair, this is we have a current box truck that we use to carry our small lawn mowing equipment. That's a 2005, the same truck. It's an Isuzu. So this is to replace that truck to use for to carry our mowing equipment. And the reason why we use a box truck is, we keep the equipment in the truck, even back at the garage or if it rains. So it's kind of a good workstation for the guys doing the grass cutting.
Okay. All right. Any questions for that? Okay. All in favor?
Yes.
Opposed? No, we're unanimous. All right. We're moving. 5-8, authorize the Mayor Harry W. Rilling to execute an agreement with GeoCorp Contracting Inc. for project RNP 22-3 Freeze Park Railing Rehabilitation for a sum not to exceed $129,650. Phase 1 alternate 2, $159,569.30 for phase 2, $112,418 phase 3, $124,193.50 for phase 4. Account numbers noted. And A8A, authorize, I'm sorry, they just went to my screen. Authorize, can someone read that, please? Can someone,
I can read it. Authorize the director.
Contingency, 10%.
Oh.
No, just read it, please. I
can read it. Authorize the Director of Recreation and Parks to execute change orders on contract with GeoCorp Contracting Incorporated for a sum not to exceed $52,583.08. Accounts noted.
Someone move the item, please. I get to pick. Ms. Ayers.
Okay, Madam Chair, I can give a little bit of background on the infamous Freeze Park railing. So this is based on the 2017, I believe, master plan for Freeze Park. This is the third time that I've been involved in bidding this railing. The first time the prices came back astronomical. I believe they were $600,000 plus to redo the railing. Our second bid, we ended up getting no replies. And that brings us to our third bid, which is what you had in front of you. And the reason why there are different phases in the bid is because we weren't sure what the numbers were going to come out at. So we had a thought process, well, let's break it up into 4 different sections. So at least if we get, something that we can afford, at least we can start the project. So the project ended up coming in within the budget that we had to do all 4 phases, which is the complete replacement of the entire fence. As Diane Marcella spoke at the beginning of the meeting, there was a plan, or at least a thought, to cantilever a stage over the river. And throughout discussions and design, that just ended up being too crazy in terms of cost and engineering. So what they did sort of settle on is sort of a little amphitheater area with seating into the hill, into the natural hill that's there now. And this fence replacement doesn't at all affect that. So this is actually phase 1 of that plan. So they're all working, in conjunction with each other. So one step does not negate the other. So this, this wouldn't affect the amphitheater at all, this fence replacement. But it is something we've been talking about for a long time, even before the master plan. Probably for the last 8-9 years, we've been talking about redoing that fence. And the biggest challenge of that fence is, there is lead paint on the fence, so it has to be removed from site, has to be refinished off site. There are sections that can't be repaired, have to be replaced as new. There's a certain section that needs to be crash rated. If you remember, somebody went through there a few years ago down to the riverbank. So there's a lot of issues with that simple fence, which is why it's it basically took us this long to get to this point.
Yeah. Also, as I think Diana was alluding to, there's other things like benches, lighting that we're looking at too. So it won't just be the fencing. Also, I've in terms of the Wall Street renovation, I've been talking to James Travers, and we may also look at the feasibility of putting a walk bridge across to give better access to the to the right of way. So we've been talking about that too, to at least maybe get a design and then maybe look for the money if it's feasible. So there's some other things that are going to be
done. Councilman Meade.
Oh, thank you. This is great news. I mean, we've been talking about this for decades, right? Yeah. I would like to see, just before the general council meeting where we'll take an official vote on it, I would like to see a little more fleshed out on the project plan.
Sure. Would that include it in your packet?
No, it just ends at the price. So that's why I was curious. Like, I know this is expensive work. There's not many iron workers left in the world. So like, is this doing the fence on both east side, south side of Wall Street, and also Mechanic Street parking lot?
It's doing all of it. And
okay,
we could have a briefing with you, or we can send the. We had a real extensive briefing with the folks to put together these numbers. So we can get you.
I would appreciate that. I'd just like to see a more full scope, because at one point we had fleshed out doing the side adjacent to Wall Street and only the park side adjacent to Main Street.
Yeah.
I asked that question. I know it's like embankment, it's river. I also like, when we do the full council packet, let everybody know it's a replacement, because in tonight's packet, it says refurbishment, and that sounds like a paint job, right? Like this was a lot of work, right?
I think there's a few sections they are going to refurbish. Yeah. So Brian, what I did is I'll email it to the rest of the committee also. But I just emailed you basically the highlighted plan, which shows the phases outlined, which will give a little bit more information on what you're asking.
Awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Hughes? Okay. All in favor? Opposed? Yeah. Thanks. All right. Unanimous again. Let's see if this works. All right. So that concludes the agenda. And we're going to, the agenda items. We're going to move on to 6, discussion. Recreation and Parks Master Plan briefing. Robert, take it away.
Yes, we wanted to bring you the same briefing that we gave the mayor. Nick Kuhn is he's with us. I think he was with us.
Yes.
There he is. There he is. Gormley. And he gave a thorough briefing, and I'm sorry that Mr. Meeks had to take off, but
yeah,
I'm gonna stop talking, and I'm gonna let Nick Kuhn share his briefing, and because I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions.
Yes, thank you. No, we're very excited to be able to update the committee on the master plan. I'm going to share a screen here real fast, and you'll see the presentation slides. Put that right up. And I'm going to move things off to the side. You don't see yourselves. All right. Did everybody see the intro slide? So we had a little bit more time, I think, with the mayor in reviewing some of this, and we took the kind of full block, just kind of presenting and asking questions as we go. I will try to move this, especially the front portion of the presentation, along fairly quickly. I'm happy at the end to go back to any slides. There's the sort of latter half of the slide deck here has some as Robert hinted to, some dense information on there, important information that we wanted to show that will take a little time to explain on here. But so we wanted to dive into that. But certainly I can go back at the end to any slides that I've gone through fairly quickly with the presentation here. There we go. All right. So we just wanted to quickly highlight where we stand in the process. And so we are in a 4-step project review. Many of you had saw this when we did one-on-one interviews. So we are completing step 2, which is our needs assessment portion here. This is really where we had public engagement earlier this year. And this is reviewing those key findings from really the first 2 steps. And we have a lot to do still this fall. We're going to have some opportunities coming up here for some more community engagement with our envisioning portion, which is really taking a long range vision plan for the city, and then ultimately circling back around with an implementation framework and strategic plan component. And so a lot of that will be heading into the fall timeframe. And so the schedule overall, again, taking those 4 see where we stand in terms of this. And so again, the public engagement is the critical cornerstone of this master plan process. We wanted to make sure we are circling up with all the groups. The needs assessment portion has taken a little bit longer because we wanted to make sure we're touching with all the stakeholders and participants that we can in this process. So we wanted to make sure we circled up with schools as well, and made sure we got input through this process. So we are diligently working to try to wrap up this process by the end of this calendar year. However, we want to make sure that we're taking the steps needed to make sure this plan represents the true community's needs and has a actionable implementation component. So if need be, it can certainly go into 2023 as needed, but we right now are on target for end of the year completion on this and presentation to full Common Council. And I just wanted to plug the next steps right now on this. We have been booking the vision workshop components here for October 13th, Thursday the 13th, and another follow-up public session on Saturday the 15th. And that will be the full day on the 13th will be at City Hall at the community room. We'll have a session in the afternoon with city staff, and then we'll have a public session in the evening. And then that's following Saturday from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. we'll have at the Senior Center, and we'll have a second public session here. So we're going to be getting that information launched. We just got the facilities booked, and we're going to get the outreach here over the next week for these dates and events. This will follow up with a city staff implementation workshop in early November. And then we will present that information again through this committee, as well as the Common Council towards the end of the year. So I know we will be proactively looking at those dates, but again, we have a couple big events here to get through for October and early November. So let's dive into some of the key findings real fast here. This is, we started again at looking at the parks themselves. And so going out and visiting each park, you can see a list here on the right of all the parks, including the school park sites across the city. We visited each one. We looked at them across 40 different elements in terms of effectiveness, conditions, comfort. And so we were able to rank the parks across those and how they more or less perform in meeting expected needs across these different categories. And so we have this information for each park location, and this will roll back into the implementation phasing as we drill down into specific recommendations for each location. But we wanted to also see what really kind of established in terms of success and opportunities across the entire city as well. And so we have a couple summary points here in terms of what we saw as some of the successes through these observations. And really, we're happy to see at all times as we were observing the parks, there was evidence of the parks being used in many cases. And so we had a good presence of people and evidence of use in the parks. And you'd be surprised, you'd see that as why a success, people using parks. In many communities, sometimes we see a number of parks where there isn't a lot of evidence of park use. And so this is a good indication that people are actively using parks and the parks are serving their needs. And so this is great to see people out. We did notice in terms of maintaining clear views as another area, making parks feel inviting, safe to be in. Certainly we did note a few outliers in this area and really focusing on crime prevention through environmental design, CPTED. And so we made notes of those cases in specific park locations. There's also, again, pride within the park system. There was from maintenance staff that we interacted with all the way through to the visitors of the parks, real pride in the parks, whether they were calf pasture or larger parks or even just our neighborhood parks. A lot of pride in what was provided in terms of the park spaces. And there's a good mix of high performing parks, whether they're new parks such as Ryan Parks or even some of the older parks of the system. We have some that really are performing on many different elements very well. It tend to be the larger regional parks and school parks were the higher performing parks in many cases. And so again, regional parks, because they have so much more to offer in terms of activity types and usage. And the school parks, because of access, really enhanced because of the schools being in proximity to the parks themselves. We had enhanced access to those. So that really helped those parks at a performance level appear higher. There are certainly opportunities that we like to highlight, and they really focus on accessibility across the system and all parks in general, really making sure some particularly older parks are able to be more accessible to users of all abilities. Providing ample places to sit, particularly shade and socialize. That is certainly something that we heard from some of the park users as we observed, having more of those more comfortable spaces to sit as well. Use of wayfinding and branding. And this goes back down to another bullet there of implementation of design standards, making sure there's consistency across the branding of the park spaces, making sure that it's a clear understanding. This is a City of Norwalk park, and that wayfinding, especially for some of the larger parks, are clear for getting to the various destinations within the park. And last is I wanted to highlight the providing flexibility for multiple uses. We have a PPP or PPS, Project for Public Spaces initiative, the Power of 10. This is a guidance of really making sure that our park spaces have, on general, about 10 or more different kinds of uses offering. And so really, this is whether it's a small pocket park or it's a large park, having activities of choices is really a key item to drawing people to visit more often. And so it's a good rule of thumb to engage in a Power of 10 idea here. We also looked at level of service, and this is a lot of data. It goes into this. I'm just highlighting just a couple pieces of this element, and we looked at it in terms of acreage provided of parks per 1,000 population. This is one way that we start to look at some of our peers, and in some ways, some of the guidance on a national level in terms of where do we stand in terms of providing access to parks and the acreage of parks here. And so we have a lot of research that goes into these elements, and this chart is actually much larger. This is condensed down a little bit here, but what I wanted to highlight are at the very bottom. The red box here highlights the summary of what were some context for us in terms of where we stand at our 2020 level of service in terms of the number of acres per 1,000 population. So currently, with all providers, including city parks, and other providers such as the taxing districts, how many acres? Where do we fall? And that's roughly a little over 30 acres per thousand. And so it's hard to understand when you just have that number. Is that good or bad? And so where do we stand? And it's unique for every community in terms of that, but we do have some national averages that we can look at. And so National Rec and Park Association's 2022 agency performance review has the latest information in regards to communities, similar size jurisdiction as Norwalk. How many acres per thousand? That's 9.2 acres. And so that's pure park acreage. They don't typically include park sites or school sites or other providers in that indicator. So that's in relations overall with public providers. Our city-owned parks, including city parks and school park sites, we roughly are at 10.2 acres per thousand. And so we're still a good, healthy amount above sort of that national benchmark through NRPA. We also look at peers in the area. And so Darien, Westport, Milford, Fairfield, we looked at their park classifications, added up acreages, and determined where they fell within an average by park type. So you can see it for regional parks, community parks, neighborhood parks. And so we're roughly on target with some of our peers, approximately 10 acres per thousand. And so that puts us in a good situation. We're slightly, again, above national standards and slightly above our peers in terms of that. Even that's just counting city-owned parks. And we have other providers that are also meeting some of those park needs. But we also wanted to look at, well, how would this change as the city continues to grow? And so by 2040, if the acreage is or the level of services to maintain the same as what we have today, we would have to add some acreage. And so if we maintain our current City of Norwalk level of service for acreage, we would ultimately need to add approximately 94 acres of city-owned parkland, and other providers would also potentially need to provide additional. So it'd be over 106 acres of additional parkland. Now that's just simply identifying numbers. How that would be implemented will come out of this plan. And there may be other, again, higher or more roles for other providers in meeting some of those needs. But if in context, again, to our peers, again, if we maintain the same level as many of our peers averages, that number starts to go down, say just under 40 acres total, because we have, again, other providers such as taxing districts that are meeting some of the park and open space needs in that. So again, context to that is great. And again, you might be looking at that 100 acres and say, 100 acres is hard to find, but it can be met through various actions. And that's where we get down to the real hard part during implementation to really see.
Excuse me, I don't know if this is an appropriate time. I just figured before we move on, you kept saying that Westport, Milford, and Fairfield are our peers, but all three of those places have populations far lower than Norwalk. I'm wondering if Stamford is our peer and what they look like, and is this the right anchor here? Are we looking at the right places? I guess my question is, why did you decide that Darien, Westport, Milford, and Fairfield are our peers?
That was input with staff in terms of what peers in terms of similar types of programming, similar types of parks in there, but we can certainly look at addition to others as well.
I mean, I'm only asking because Milford, I think, is the biggest of those four places, and Milford, I'm pretty sure, is like 50,000 people. We have at least 90.
Yes, yep, 91,000 as of 2020. Yes, yes, indeed. So yeah, we can certainly look at the larger communities within the state as well, and compare. As we get to larger systems, it does get a little harder in terms of seeing apples to apples in comparisons. But we could certainly continue to add to that. But I think in terms of the proximity to these peer communities as well, that was the other factor in this. Yeah. Okay. Another aspect of level of service was access, and this is where equity really starts to come into play. So we, again, we look at, in this case, the system as a whole with the park classification types. And there's a series of maps. I'm just highlighting a few maps here, but we start to actually use some tools to identify what are the true walk sheds and bike sheds of parks across the city. And so the first one here on the left shows school park sites, and those walk sheds are calculated at a half mile or approximately 10-minute walk from the school sites, the school park sites, and those are shown in the orange coloring. And you can see how school park sites play a critical role in providing some of those needs throughout the city, but you can start to see some of the clustering of where those are meeting some of those needs. Now, again, we have a series of maps that highlight these individually, but the map on the right brings it all together in terms of the various different types of parks. And as the parks become larger in size and offer more, such as the regional parks like Gaff Pasture, the service areas tend to grow in size in terms of the population that is served. So regional parks are serving approximately a 3-mile service area. That's shown in the blue. And then sort of underneath some of that blue color is a purple color. That's their community parks that have a 1 mile or about a 20-minute walk service area. But even when you start to layer in all the different service areas, you can start to see that it doesn't completely cover in terms of the city. There are some pockets, or what we call gap areas. And as we start to move into the visioning and implementation phases, if priorities are to potentially add or look for additional park sites or needs, these are some of those areas, the gap areas that we would start to really target to see. Are there opportunities to provide access and reach an equitable distribution of access to parks across the city? But we didn't just stop at the parks themselves. We also want to understand facilities because it may not be just about, well, I would like to be able to get to a park. It really, for many users, it's about what's in those parks. And so we actually drill this down to different facility types as well, and did the same thing in terms of walk sheds, in this case, half-mile or 10-minute walk. The map on the left highlights for playgrounds, where all playgrounds are in terms of city-owned parks and school park sites. And you can again see clusterings of those areas. The parks that have playground within them are highlighted, are bolded in the lists. And we did the same on the right for basketball courts. And you start to see the distribution of where basketball courts in public parks are located. And some areas, particularly in the north end of the city, have some large areas that do not have presence of a public basketball court. And so, again, we drill this down on many different facility types. And so when we start to hear from public, we need more, for example, more basketball courts, we can start to understand where that need might be coming from in terms of who has access and who doesn't in terms of a 10-minute walk here. And this, again, provides some guidance in terms of identifying those needs geographically. We launched the public engagement back in April and March of this year, and they included many different techniques to really ask the questions, what are your needs, what are your priorities in terms of parks and recreation in the community. We had a series of virtual workshops. We also had a series of focus groups, and those focus group topics are identified on the right here. We had 8 different topic areas and participants across those. We also had stakeholder and elected official interviews. So many of you were in those interviews. And then we had some online engagement as well. We have a project website, an online survey, and finally a statistical survey. And we will highlight many of those items here this evening. The online engagement has been great. We've had over 2,500 visits to the site, and this will continue to ramp up as we prepare for those visioning workshops in October. And so we'll continue to populate that information on the project website and highlight those opportunities to participate in this process through that as well. So continue to help us get the word out about the website and direct folks to the website to identify additional information and how to participate. The online survey, we had just under 400 responses across the city. And we were very happy to see approximately, this was again open to anybody that would like to provide information. And we're very happy to see that about 93% of respondents were residents of Norwalk. And so we had great participation from residents, from citizens of the city. And this was really a means, we were actually had such a great turnout on this. We were able to actually have results statistically valid for many of the questions. And so this gave us a good way to really compare what we were hearing from other workshops, as well as a statistical survey, and see and compare those results. The good part is many things were very consistent with what we were hearing, and we'll highlight those here this evening. Some takeaways from the public engagement. We wanted to put these in sort of some columns here to summarize the things that were really mentioned the most often. And so this is in descending order of how many times these particular topics were mentioned across these different techniques. We started with talking with recreation staff, and this really focused on identifying from the rec programming side, what were some of the strongest or best programs, what were some of the biggest challenges, and also qualitatively identifying some of the underserved markets within the city. And so you can see some of the results there from staff. The interviews with council members, as well as the focus groups, were a little different in terms of the subjects that were discussed. But you can see in, again, descending order what those highlights were. Many of the council members, we did hear a lot about the quality, or concerns about the quality of the parks, particularly whether the maintenance and the quality was equitable across all parks. That was mentioned the most often, but there was quickly followed with concerns in regards to staffing resources within the department as well, to follow that up. And this wasn't unique just to elected officials. This is something in terms of staffing. You can see the third bullet on the focus groups. So even residents and other participants were really noting the staffing concerns as potential impacts to the quality of parks and how these parks are maintained. But we also had access to fields were common across both groups. And one of the unique items from council members was the very last bullet we wanted to highlight was the need for an indoor sort of year-round facility. And that was something a little bit unique that we heard from elected officials, but it wasn't listed as the highest or one of the most frequently asked for items from focus groups, where there was a little bit more focus on connectivity and access to parks and barriers in terms of affordability for youth to participate in programming as well. So this is a quick summary of that. We have probably over 100 pages of notes from the interviews and community meetings that really boils it down to the big findings. But we wanted to do some additional drilling down in terms of the staffing aspects. This was, again, something that we heard frequently mentioned in a lot of the interviews. And so we, again, wanted to do some benchmarking to see where we fell as Norwalk within some of the national averages. And so we can use National Rec and Park Association data for similar sized jurisdictions and park agencies. So this is, again, population as well as park system acreage and funding levels. So this was really for the top portion. 56 communities across the country fell within the range of peers for the comparison. In terms of median operating expenditures per capita, the national average across those 56 agencies was $97. But for Norwalk, we're in the $53 range. So substantially lower in terms of expenditures per capita for parks and recreation. And again, staffing was noted as a concern. And so we wanted to, again, see the comparisons on this. In this case, 51 agencies had populated information in terms of their staffing levels. And so the average for jurisdictions this size, the same size as Norwalk, was for every 10,000 population was to have a full-time equivalent staff of 9.3 positions. And so Norwalk was substantially lower again with under 3 staff full-time equivalent per 10,000 population. So this is a good just a context to really understand where we were falling within that. And so we'll have more information on this in the master plan, but this is again a highlight that came out of those interviews for that. And the column on the right was really just summarizing for programming types what other peer agencies were actually offering in their programming mix. And so we wanted to again highlight, you can see the percentages of those peers that were offering programming in those different categories. So you can see the mixture there. And again, we have drilled down on where Norwalk falls within some of those comparisons. So the statistical survey is really one of the items that we have a lot of data from and we wanted to share. And this is really an important aspect that we wanted to highlight because this not only represents those that were more than willing to provide information, the sort of advocates of parks. The statistical survey is important because it also represents households that may not utilize parks currently today or participate in programs. And so this was actually every household had an equal opportunity to receive a survey and participate and return a survey. So this is a random and a stratified survey. And I like to say, essentially, this is the cup of water matches the pool that it's drawn from. And so demographically, the results are weighted to match the demographics of the city. And so these are important items. And I'll start with a fairly easy one. The questions in the survey build up in complexity, but we had to share one here just to kind of start this off and just explain the format for the next few slides here. This question asked respondents what sort of leisure and recreation facilities would you most prefer to visit in the city. And what you'll see here in most of these slides, you'll have a chart here on the left, and then there'll be some color boxes on the right here. And the survey resulted in hundreds of pages of data and a lot of cross tabulations. And so we've come through that. I know many of the department staff as well have also thoroughly gone through those results. And we summarize some of the unique findings from those cross tabulations in those other boxes. So you'll see some references to that to add some more context to the results here. But in this case, for this particular question, we asked and we provided a response to 4 choices. And the darkest blue color represents the #1 choice as in terms of preference of where people would like to visit when it comes to leisure and recreation. And overwhelmingly, you'll see an extremely large dark blue first choice bar there for Calf Pasture Beach. And so this really sets Calf Pasture apart from really all other options across the city, something truly unique for Norwalk. That is followed though by Cranberry Park as well. So the top 2 preferences from residents are city-owned parks. And you can see #3 then is restaurants. So when it comes down to what you would like to do in your own leisure or recreation, there's a lot of support for city parks here. Aquarium, local neighborhood sort of parks, and then state and national parks kind of round out that clustering there, and then it starts to drop off. But you can see this is also consistent across all age groups here, but particularly households with children over 10 are less likely to visit parks outside Norwalk. And so there are also households without children who are more likely to visit Cranberry Park. And you could just see, part of the offerings within parks, how that lends to different household types. But again, across all age groups, these were consistently ranked in the same way. So again, we'll kind of build up in some of these, and we'll end with some questions that pertain towards funding and priorities. But we wanted to ask residents, what were some barriers in terms of participation or visitation to parks? And so we have the top 8 barriers shown here from Norwalk, and you'll see the color bars represent Norwalk results. And where we have national averages, you'll see a gray little bar underneath that shows the national average for those results. So not knowing what is offered was the number one at 39% of residents. Nationally, that's about 33%. And nationally, that's usually in the number one or two categories. There are constantly working to communicate what is offered to residents. And so that usually is a number one barrier, communication. So we're always working on that aspect of that. But I wanted to highlight for Hispanic, Latino, and Black households, the number one was actually lack of restrooms. And so that was number two overall in the city. We don't have national averages for that, but for many households, that actually was their number one need. So that's what we do want to make sure we look at those in different aspects. And the others, you'll start to see some stronger differences in terms of national averages versus Norwalk. So I do not know park locations. 18% nationally, 31% of households in Norwalk have that as a barrier. So again, communicating not just what is offering, but in knowing where the parks are, making that information as easy as possible to obtain is really a key aspect here. I'll kind of skip down to a couple here in terms of some others, but you can see again, parks are too far. This was highlighted 23% locally, 12% nationally. So again, a large deviation from the national average. And that starts to again lend towards the mapping you saw in terms of access to parks. So it starts to confirm some of those findings. Security is insufficient or loitering problems, 10% nationally, 21% locally. So let's again drill down into those topics to make sure what is the root cause of those elements. And we really spent some of that time in focus groups talking about some of these early results, and we were hearing that it's more about certain park locations and a more of a loitering issue. And that also goes to the very last one, parks are too crowded, 5% nationally, 17% locally. And when we drilled down on that topic, it really centered along Calf Pasture Beach as something that is just so overwhelmingly visited during the summertime that really was what was driving a lot of those responses in terms of one particular park being so crowded, and that was really a standout result, and definitely still it identifies a barrier for some community, for some residents. So these are a little bit more complicated, and this is actually combining a series of questions that we had in the survey. So we asked two questions. One was for facilities, recreation facilities. We asked response, do you have a need, yes or no? And if they indicated yes for a particular facility, then we asked follow-up, how much of that need is currently being met? And so this chart summarizes those two questions down, and it focuses on the households that identify they have a need and that either that need is only being met partially, which is shown in the gray, or it's not being met at all, and that's shown in the red hash. And so it's focusing in, and from that we can extrapolate how many households across the city then that represents. And so the orange line in the middle of the chart there identifies everything, all the facilities above that. More than 20% of households across the city have a need for that facility type that is not being met currently or only partially being met. And so the number one is walking paths and sidewalks. You'll see just under 15,000 households out of about 34,000 households across the city have a need that's not being met or only partially being met. About 43% overall of households in the city. And I wanted to focus down, you can see in the blue chart, the top five, the other four there, restrooms, natural parks, trails, outdoor pools, all in the 30% or sort of higher in terms of households. But outdoor pools particularly, what you'll see there, over 10,000 households have a need, but a large portion of that is actually not being met. And you can see a very small gray portion of the bar there. So 88% of households that say they have a need for outdoor pools are not being met or only partially being met. So it's a very high ratio that has an identified need for that portion.
Nick, I have just like a little bit of question to understand the last two charts. So
Yeah.
these are, needs and whether they're being met and things like that. Is this a perception of their needs, of what their need is and what their needs being met? So, for instance, in restrooms, can we really identify that we're missing a lot of restrooms in our parks? Or is this just a perception that, oh gosh, I think that I can't find restrooms when I go to the parks, but there's actually, restrooms there. Do you know what I'm saying? Can we tease that out of the?
Yeah. No, that's what, this is it's a combination of those types of, whether it's a perception or it's real, it is an identified need. And so that's where we circle back around to this to say, do we actually have a high number of restrooms in park facilities? And do we just need to make sure that we have standards in terms of where future restrooms are placed and how wayfinding may direct people to the restrooms? Or do we have actual needs for restrooms? And that will come out through the next steps with the visioning workshops as well. Yeah. But, and as you highlight, this is a summary of need. And so the next slide actually layers another portion to that, and that is it important? And so again, people may have a need for a facility, but it may not be important to them. And so we wanted to make sure to separate those out in the questioning. And so this layers, again, that importance item on top of this. So whether it is important or not. And what you'll see is there's a lot of consistency in this, but just some will move up and down a few spaces. You can see outdoor pools moved up a couple spaces, restrooms down a couple spaces. But what you start to see is there's some consistency in terms of what are needs and what are most important for households here. And so what this does is this ranks those questions, and the highest walking pass is automatically weighted to a 200 out of score here, and then everything else is weighted into that. So you can see the number one is always ranked as 200, but anything that scores above 100 in terms of these combined scores are typically identified as high priority. These are items that have a high amount of need that's not being met, and also a high level of importance from households. And so you can see a lot of consistency with the previous in there. But we also notice a lot of what we may hear as the most vocal in terms of advocates for some facilities actually fall towards the bottom. And so when it comes to a lot of the athletic facilities, we actually, when it's put in perspective for community-wide needs as well as community-wide importance, that starts to fall down, and so special interests tend to be towards the bottom portion of this. So this rarely reflects, again, users and current non-users of the system, what their needs are. We did the same series for activities, and so same type of chart, but instead of facilities, this asks questions in terms of programs and activities that people would like. And again, everything above the orange bar represents an activity that more than 20% of households across the city has a need for, that's only partially or not being met. And so number one was nature enjoyment, with over 12,000 households, or about 35% of households across the city. So that they have a need to go out and enjoy nature, but they're not getting that from really any provider, whether it's the city or others, in terms of meeting that need. We highlighted aquatics here again as a component, because this is, again, as you start to identify, 85% of households across that have an identified need for aquatics programming are not being met, or only partially being met. And so again, another high percentage stand out there in terms of water-based programming, aquatics-based programming. But we also wanted to highlight here at the bottom, just because the number of households with the need might be smaller, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's not a defined need within the community for that type of activity or programming. In fact, many of those that show up at the bottom, youth camps, team programming, and esports, you can see in the green box there, they actually have a high percentage of those households have a need that's not being met. And so there aren't other providers within the community that's meeting those needs. And so even though it's a smaller number, just in comparison to some other activities, a high percentage of those still have a true need, and they're really not being met. And so part of this is through implementation is really a discussion as the next step of where the city falls in terms of their role in meeting some of these needs. Certainly do not have to be a provider for all activities, but a good understanding of what is out there in terms of those needs. And again, we added in the layer of importance here. So again, whether the activity was important to the household allows us, again, perspective of seeing where we fall. And you know, again, nature enjoyment and fitness and wellness and special events all are very common across the country in terms of having some of those needs. But we do have clustering that goes on in here, and you can see some groupings with those different kind of activities. So this is a summary of what we were looking at in terms of the program types. So comparisons to national averages, we had a low number of, or a lower number of percentage of residents participating in programs. So in the green box there, you can see 20% of Norwalk residents have participated in programs, and nationally this typically falls within 32% range. Now we wanted to put an asterisk next to that because programming has been very challenging in the last couple of years. So this is a benchmark for us, and this would be an important indicator to follow through as in the future to see, does this number increase, and what kind of actions can we take to increase that number. But we might have a little bit of the pandemic impacting the terms of whether people have participated in programs in the last year or so. But some of the standouts here really are nature-based programming is to see it ranked so highly is a little bit of atypical. We tend to see other fitness is usually the number one for a lot of communities. So that was a little unique for Norwalk. And then there's, we'll touch on the willingness to pay items here in just a couple minutes. But again, the last bullet, 2/3 of households with a need for special recreation is not being met or partially being met. And again, that hits at the topic of, again, some of those programs that might not have had a high number of households with a need still have a very strong amount of those households needing a need. But again, we with some of the summaries here, 80% of residents that participated in programs rated it as excellent or good with their experience, the quality of those programs. So that's actually just slightly better than national average. So those that are participating really do enjoy the programs that they're participating in. So the quality of the programs is not really necessarily an issue. It's making sure, again, residents are aware of what is being offered as most of those. So the last few questions here pertain towards priorities and funding. And so this question, again, consolidates a couple questions in the survey. The first one was asking respondents to identify their support for specific actions that the city could take. And then it was a follow-up question that asked, for those that you support, those actions you support, would you be willing to, which are the top ones you'd be willing to fund with your tax dollars? And so again, that adds a level of importance and prioritization to those actions. And so you can start to see, again, the ranking choices. Their first choice is the darkest blue, followed by the lighter blue is the second choice. But what really bubbles to the top here, the first two, are about maintaining the parks that we have. And so you can really see this stand out that there's a strong desire to maintain the existing beach parks, and water access is number one. That really is set apart from others as the number one action here that people are willing to put their tax dollars behind. But that's followed by maintain existing parks as well. But then we start to get into some development and redevelopment actions following that. And in fact, the developing new trails and redeveloping and improving beach parks or waterfront parks were the top two choices for the population ages below 34. So our younger generations were more supportive of developing more connectivity and redeveloping some of our waterfront parks than they are about, they say, maintaining some of the existing parks. So they really are about some new investments from the younger populations for a city here. There's also a strong support for more athletic fields and sports courts from households with children under 10. It's actually that segment or household type actually represents over double what the results were for citywide and all age groups. So that really is a stronger recognition from those with younger children that there are a need for more sports court and fields across the city. But interesting enough, that really dropped off with households that have children over 10. So those that may be participating the most in some of the athletic leagues are actually, that's where it really drops off. But it's really the top choice for households with children under 10 is for the development of indoor-outdoor aquatics. And so again, we come back to some of the aquatics being very high. So 35% of households with children under 10 indicated aquatics being the most important action they were willing to invest in. But we also asked different types of funding questions too. We also asked, so if you had a willingness to pay for the actions that you are most supportive of, how much would you be willing to have in terms of additional property taxes? And so we had a range of choices here. You can see 67% of residents are willing to pay additional property taxes to fund their most important actions here. And that's fairly high to see. Anything above 60% for these statistical surveys generally represent strong enough support that would pass in, say, a public referendum. And so we like to see those types of numbers if there's a strong willingness in that the dollar amount. And so you can actually see from the highest figure, $100 per household, approximately a little over 3 million annually could be raised through that amount if that were to pass. Now, 25% of the population under 44 do not support additional property tax. And while 21% of households with children under 10 support the highest amount. So you can start to see some differences in terms of where that falls. Younger population support more funding, and particularly households with children, younger children under 10, support the higher amounts. And we can extrapolate through that as potential users of many of the amenities. They have a strong understanding of support for those. Then lastly, the source of funding, we ask in terms of support for alternate funding sources here, whether they're in terms of Parks Foundation or sponsorships, user fees or revenue bonds. What were the support levels here? You can see a clear indication of less in terms of taxes, more of nonprofit or sponsorship as alternatives for funding. The population under 45 has the highest support for Parks Foundation and sponsorship at 71 and 65%. So substantially more support for those alternative funding from a younger population. Males typically supported higher property taxes and bonds. Females typically supported higher support for Parks Foundations and user fees. And then we asked a question in terms of dollar amounts for user fees particularly. That was, again, something that was indicated as a strong level of support for potential additional revenue. And we asked respondents their willingness to pay a user fee or charge per person, per event for their favorite type of activity or program. And so you can see a breakdown here. 68% were in support of additional user fees. And so the highest support for the highest amount, $5, was actually from the 18 to 64 population with over 30%. And then that really dropped off with our 65 and over population. That's where 16%, so less than half that support level for our senior population. And 35% of households with children, again, under 10, support $5. So again, our households with young children recognize a willingness, have a strong willingness to fund additional taxes, as well as to have additional user fees for participation. Then finally, the user fees, not having any user fees, 65 and up, 47% of our senior population do not support additional user fees. And so again, that will be rolled into part of our recreation program analysis results. So again, I wanted to just wrap up, and I'll leave it on this for the next steps, what we have events coming up. I know that was a lot of information, and I thank you all for listening through that. I'm certainly happy to go back to any slides here and clarify any questions you may have.
Thank you, Nick, for that presentation. It was very thorough. We can see that you've been doing quite a bit of work over the past several months. So we appreciate it. It's a good foundation for us. Ms. McMurray, you have a question?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nick, for this very comprehensive presentation. I know we've all been looking forward to this since we started talking to you many months ago, and I appreciate all of your work on this, as well as the Rex and Park team behind this. Many things stood out to me, but two things predominantly stood out to me. Youth programs, which I know we've talked about a lot in this committee, and how successful they've been, especially during the summer months. So I'm really glad to see that there's two things happening. One, we are having successful programs when we put them in place, and it is making money for the city, which is wonderful from an economy side, but also that we have interest for those things. And so I think that's going to be a program that we can really focus on growing over the next several years. And then two, and Mr. Stowers knows this is a topic near and dear to my heart that I've been talking to him since he came on board about, is aquatics and a pool, or more pools. So I am really happy to see that my idea is sort of in line with what is needed. And I think it's so important that we have more aquatic programs and pools to do that in, because we are a water town. I mean, we live right on the water, and it's super important to have water safety and education for our youth. It is a life skill, and I think it should be equitable and affordable for all. And the only way we can do that is to offer more programming. And I think there's a lot of money we can go after in terms of grants and scholarships for programs like that. We just need the facilities. And then finally, I love that we're talking about alternate funding sources. Mr. Stowers and I have been talking about this a lot, and I am going to do everything in my power to help the Rex and Park team get a foundation going, or alternate funding sources, so we can then fund pools and other programs. And I'm going to make that my #1 priority in the next year while I'm sitting on council still. So thank you. My last thing is just a question to Nick. Can you please email us this presentation after the meeting? Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Ms. Shanahan?
I have just a quick question and wonder how this is also fed in. And poor Mr. Stowers has heard a lot about this, as well as Ken Hughes. So a lot of the feedback I get as a council person is that the fields that we have aren't accessible to teams across the city, not only the teams that we might represent for the city, but private teams. And that kind of gets back into the fee-based programming and things like that. How is this reflected in your master plan? And can you talk to that point?
Yes, that's what we certainly have heard that through a lot of our qualitative techniques. So a lot of our focus groups, discussions centered around making sure that there was access to fields. And that was one of the top bullets in the focus groups discussion. So we know, that starts to drill us down to looking at before we recommend adding more fields, finding more land essentially to develop any kind of fields, is we got to start looking at the low-hanging fruit. And I know that the department has been able to start to implement a registration or the field management for that a little bit stronger than what has historically been. And I think that will start to come into the implementation strategies of how can we use our existing fields to more benefit to the community with more access, because I know a number of fields, a lot of what we heard were they can sit for periods because you know, one particular league or group has access to those at really at any time they may need it during a period, and that really you know, again, communications of that needs to be, I think, a little bit more clear, but we're going to focus on those as implementation.
We're also working in conjunction, working on a request for a proposal, one for a fee structure that is equitable and feeds into a scientific-based reason to raise fees. You know, and the master plan is showing us, the survey is showing us that people are willing to pay, but we want to do a scientific analysis of what that should be and the ranges. Also within that RFP will be a study on a fee policy. So our intent is to allow both public and private entities to use our fields and access our fields. And there'll have to be some sharing and there'll have to be some sacrifice. But we're working on an interim plan now that will do that. But we're waiting to confirm it with the master plan, the strategic plan. But that's the direction we're going in.
Thank you. That's a really important issue for my constituency. I appreciate you addressing that.
Councilwoman Ayers.
Thank you. And thank you for presenting this information to us. My question is, as you were walking around to the parks and evaluating the multiple different aspects that you shared with us today and working alongside of our Park and Rec staff, is there anything like a checklist or something of a level of standards? So something that you said early on in your presentation really resonated with me, because you said, well, certain parks were highly favorable because they had this, that, and the other. Do we have something within the system that we currently have that is a standard that all of our parks should have? So it could be a checklist, it could be whatever. They all have the right amount of bathrooms there, so that when we're looking at all of our parks, we're not looking at we're looking at them in the same lens. Do we have any type of documentation or anything like that?
In terms of park development standards, there certainly there are some standards in terms of how certain elements of parks have to be developed, and that tends towards aspects that the city manages for any development, really. But in terms of establishing park design standards, what we were noting here was really that the design quality and the mix of choices in terms of amenities within the newer parks, particularly, were well done, and were noticeably different than some of the older parks in what they provided and the quality of that. So there's definitely an improvement. Now, what we were also observing was that, again, there was some inequality in terms of that across the park system. So certainly our older parks, in many cases, that were in the 50 to 60 year age range, need some reinvestment in them to bring them up to those standards. And that included accessibility as a key aspect of it. But yeah, certainly our recommendations, and we're going to have in the master plan some case studies, and this is one particular item that we'll focus on in terms of how parks can be flexible in terms of meeting their needs for future changes too, because we want to make sure that as recreation uses and needs in that change over time, our parks can continue to meet those needs without, major redesign of those facilities.
I think also, Nick, what I'm hoping comes out of the strategic plan is a real park classification. We can basically, you can classify a park just by, the attraction, like, for instance, Patrick Beach, even though we may not say it's a regional park, we know it's a regional park because people come from all over the region. There's pocket parks, there's neighborhood parks, there's community parks, and we need really to classify those in the strategic plan and go through our park system and see where they stand. And then not only that, but have some park use guidelines where we may look nationally what what assets are in those types of parks, so we can be more definite about that. So I'm hoping that comes out of the strategic plan.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I get what you're saying, but I'm asking is a little bit more than what has been identified. Maybe I should say it this way. Is it possible for us to have a Norwalk standard, that this is a standard of what any park, no matter what the location, no matter what the accessibility, no matter what the use is, this is a standard of what a Norwalk park should look like. And anything outside of that standard, or we don't allow our parks to get outside of that standard. So that's kind of like a Norwalk standard, like our parks are going to be at this level. And then I think in the strategic plan, as Mr. Stauer said, we have to work out how to make sure if they're not at that standard to get them to that standard. But I think it would be beneficial for just employees, as well as us and people, residents that live in Norwalk, to have an identified Norwalk standard of park.
Yeah, I think that's where we will get to within each classification.
Yeah, there could be a lot of communities will, as Mr. Cyrus was highlighting here, was that we have communities that will establish their classifications, and within that it will be more of a description of what kind of park qualifies for that classification, so that it's more transparent on how that park is meeting those needs, and so that begins to set a standard for that park to deliver, say, certain types of amenities in there. Some communities will have moved in the direction of looking at different types of experiences that they want to make sure that certain parks or all parks provide within a walkable distance to every resident in the city. So there's lots of different ways to do that. And then other parks have adopted the more formal design sort of guidelines or pattern books that outline, how certain, what kind of amenities do you need to include in a park entrance, and proximity to, say, restrooms, and where parking should be located within a park, if that park should even have parking within it. So there's lots of different examples that we can draw from and see what is the best fit for implementing the vision that residents would like to see for Norwalk.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So are we, so Nick, are we tying staff levels to any of this? I mean, as we grow and develop, which is a good thing, and are we connecting staffing levels to help maintain that? So if we're saying we're going to do X, Y, and Z for a city of our size with our plan as we move forward, what does a master plan and a fully staffed recreation park look like in order to achieve these our goals and to maintain our facilities? Because we can talk about all of this, but one, we need staff.
That's an excellent point. And we, as part of the implementation development, that's one of the hardest parts of it is really as we make recommendations that are again linked towards back to, as a community, what did we say were our highest needs and priorities. As we develop recommendations towards the phasing of that implementation, we then go back and make sure that we're tying operational and maintenance costs and staffing needs to that phased approach as well. And so that we have that realistic, and more of a full picture of what it's going to mean in terms of costs and staffing to implement.
Great, thank you. Mr. Stowers, are we all set with the presentation? Is there anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I think I want to thank Nick again. He's been real easy to work with, real easy to shift. He added another meeting and obliged to stay around for a second meeting on the 15th. It's important, I think, that we get as many people out on the 13th, and for the staff and the public session in the evening, and the Saturday session at what we think is going to be at the Senior Center. It's very important to get as many people out as possible. There'll be, we had someone on talking about whether there was another opportunity to have input. This is the best opportunity in person to have input. Yeah. And we'll be taking that input in both meetings to complete all the data that Nick and information that Nick's collected thus far. So it's very important that we get people out. So our communications director for the city will be getting out notices, and we all should do our part in getting as many people out as possible for this meeting, for these meetings.
Councilwoman McMurray, you had your hand up again?
Yeah, I just wanted to, because communications is such an important part of my day-to-day life, ask how we were going to sort of push that information out to get it out to as many people as possible, but Mr. Stowers answered that. So as soon as we see those graphics available, we can go ahead and all push those out on our social media channels and via email. I think it's just really important that people know that there is the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think if there are no more questions, will someone do the honors? Councilwoman McMurray?
Motion to adjourn, please.
She beat you, Lisa. All in favor? And Mr. Khan, thank you so much. Look forward to our continued, there we go, working together.
Thank you all for the time this evening. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good
night,
night,
everybody. And I apologize. Thank you.